I still remember the silence of that morning, the kind that feels too heavy, too deliberate, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. The world had just begun to thaw after a long winter, the air still biting with cold, but carrying that unmistakable scent of wet pine and decomposing leaves that told me spring was close. I was standing just beyond the ranger station at Elk Valley National Forest, staring down the trail that wound east toward the ridge. I'd walked that same trail 100 times before, but that morning, it looked different. Maybe it was the fog that clung stubbornly to the trees, or the way the ground seemed to glisten unnaturally in the early light. But mostly, I think it was me. Something in me already knew that whatever waited beyond that ridge was going to change the way I saw this place, and maybe myself forever. My name doesn't matter much. I've worked as a forest ranger in this corner of Montana for over a decade now. Most of that time, I've lived alone in the woods, stationed out of a small cabin near Timberline Ridge. I know the sound of every owl, the rhythm of every creek, the way snow settles differently depending on which way the wind bends through the valley. You develop a relationship with a place like this. It becomes a part of you. But that same closeness has a way of turning on you when things start to feel wrong, when the stillness starts watching you back. The morning the footprints appeared, I was out on a call. A family had reported hearing strange cries the night before near one of the primitive campsites deeper in the valley. Nothing unusual, could have been a coyote, an elk, or even the wind carrying sound across the ridges. But it was early in the season, and the snow hadn't fully melted yet, so I figured I'd check it out before hikers started showing up again. I parked the truck near the trailhead and hiked in with my radio, a thermos of coffee, and a pair of binoculars hanging off my chest strap. By mid-morning, I'd reached the site. It looked untouched, fire ring cold, tent pads clear, just snow and pine needles. I was about to head back when I noticed the tracks. They were faint at first, long impressions in the snow leading downhill toward the creek. What caught my attention wasn't their size, though they were large, but the spacing. Too far apart for a man, too narrow for a bear, and there was something about the way they curved like the creature had been walking on its toes. I followed them, half out of curiosity, half out of a sense of duty. The prints wound through the trees in a single unbroken line. I stopped at one point and squatted down beside them. The edges of the prints were sharp, not softened by melt or time. Whatever made them had passed through not more than an hour before, but that didn't make sense. I'd been watching this trail all morning. Nothing. No movement, no sound. As I followed them farther down, the woods began to change. The air grew stiller. The chatter of birds faded into silence, and the only sound left was the crunch of my boots and the faint trickle of water somewhere ahead. I reached the creek and found the last print at the edge of the bank. I expected to see where the creature had crossed, but the footprints just stopped. No sign of them on the other side. No disturbance in the mud or snow, just an abrupt end at the waterline, as if whatever had been walking there had vanished mid-step. That kind of thing doesn't sit right with you when you've spent your life in the woods. I checked every direction, scanned the creek bed for drag marks or signs of a fall, but there was nothing. I radioed it into the main station, told them I might have a bear or injured animal in the area, but I didn't mention the way the tracks ended. It sounded too strange even to say out loud. When I got back to the cabin that evening, the sun was already sinking. I sat at the table with a cup of black coffee, staring at my boots. They were still damp from the creek. I kept thinking about those prints, about how precise they looked, not like paw marks, not like boots either. Almost human, but wrong. Longer, narrower, with what looked like deep impressions at the toe. I told myself it was just melting snow distorting the shape, but that explanation didn't sit right either. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound outside. It was faint, almost delicate, a rhythmic crunching like footsteps moving across the gravel path outside my cabin. I froze in bed, listening. The steps would come close, then fade, then come close again, circling. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the beam slicing through the fog. Nothing. The forest was motionless, the air so cold it burned my lungs. But the next morning when I went to check the path, there they were, those same prints, circling the cabin in uneven loops. Always 2 or 3 inches deep, perfectly formed, and once again ending abruptly in the snow. No beginning, no end, just gone. You tell yourself not to panic. You try to rationalize it. Maybe kids wandered up here. Maybe it's an animal and I'm just overanalyzing the pattern. But deep down, the rational part of your brain starts losing its footing. You feel the forest watching. The same woods that used to comfort you now feels like it's holding its breath again, waiting. I started sleeping with the radio on after that, just static, low and constant, so the silence wouldn't feel so suffocating. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Then, on the 4th, I heard it again, the footsteps, but this time they didn't circle. They stopped, right outside my door. I held my breath and reached for the flashlight, heart hammering so hard I could feel it echo through the mattress. I waited, counting the seconds. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a slow, deliberate knock. Not with a fist, something heavier, a dull, resonant thud against the wooden door, 3 times. Then silence. I didn't move for what felt like hours. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door, the night was empty again. The prints, however, were back, not circling this time, just a straight line leading away into the trees, fading into the darkness. That was the moment I stopped believing this was just an animal. There was intention in those movements, a kind of awareness. The next day, I decided to follow them again. I left at dawn, radio clipped tight to my shoulder, shotgun slung over my back, not because I thought I'd need it, but because I didn't know what else to bring. The prints led deep into the valley, farther than before, across frozen creeks and through patches of fog that hung thick as smoke. After about 2 miles, I reached a clearing I didn't recognize, a depression in the earth surrounded by old birch trees. In the center was an opening, half hidden by brush, a cave mouth, wide and black. I hesitated. There was no record of a cave here on any of our maps, but the footprints, clear as ever, led straight inside. I radioed the station, but the signal was dead. Not weak, dead. Static swallowed my voice. I tried again, nothing. I looked around, took one last breath, and stepped into the dark. The air changed the moment I crossed into the cave. It wasn't just colder. It was heavier, thicker, like stepping under water. The smell hit me next. A damp, almost metallic scent mixed with something faintly sweet, like decaying fruit. I aimed my flashlight ahead, the beam trembling across slick rock walls that glistened as if sweating. The footprints continued before me, pressed deep into the mud, each one perfect, leading farther into the dark. I told myself I'd only go a few yards in, just enough to confirm there wasn't an injured hiker or animal trapped inside. But that kind of reasoning always sounds logical when you're standing at the edge. Once you take those first few steps, logic starts slipping away. The walls narrowed as I went deeper. My breathing grew louder in the stillness, echoing strangely like the air itself was pressing back. At one point, I caught what sounded like movement ahead, a faint scraping, maybe claws or stone against stone. I froze and aimed my light toward the sound, but the beam just dissolved into the darkness. Then I saw it, not the creature, at least not directly, but the print on the wall. A single handprint, smeared across the stone about shoulder height. It was large, larger than mine, the fingers impossibly long, as if stretched. The mud it was made from was darker than the ground around it, nearly black and wet, though the floor beneath was dry. That's when I felt it. A rush of air against my neck, subtle but distinct, like breath. I spun around, the beam of my flashlight cutting wildly across the cave walls, but there was nothing, just the narrowing tunnel and the faint sound of dripping water. I stepped back toward the entrance, trying to keep my composure, but the light flickered once, twice, and went out. For a moment, I was swallowed whole by the dark. There's something about total darkness most people never experience. Out here, when you kill your light, the blackness isn't empty. It's alive. You can feel it pressing against you, testing you, whispering to your instincts that you don't belong. I stood perfectly still, every nerve screaming, and that's when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic clicking sound echoing from deeper within the tunnel. Not mechanical, organic, like the sound of teeth tapping together. It was moving closer. I don't remember running. I just remember the sound of my boots slapping against the wet stone, my breath ragged, my shoulders slamming into the side of the tunnel as I tried to find my way back out. My flashlight flared back to life just as I reached the mouth of the cave, and I burst into daylight, gasping. When I looked back, the cave was silent again. But the prints, they were gone. All of them. The mud I'd followed in was undisturbed, smooth as if no one had ever stepped there. I told myself I'd imagined it, that fear had made me see things that weren't there. But when I got back to my truck, I saw something that made my stomach drop. On the driver's side window, smeared across the glass, was a single long handprint, black, dripping, identical to the one I'd seen on the cave wall. I drove back to the station without stopping, my hands shaking the entire way. When I got there, I told the senior ranger on duty that I had found signs of illegal caving activity and that someone had been tampering with forest property. I didn't mention the prints, didn't mention the sound, didn't mention the breath on my neck. You learn quickly out here that some stories aren't meant to be written down. For a while, things went quiet. A week passed, then 2. Spring came in earnest. The snow melted off the trails and the first campers began trickling back into the park. I convinced myself it was over. Whatever I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, had been a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. Then the calls started. First, a couple hiking near Elk Ridge reported hearing chanting in the woods at night. Then a group of backpackers found deep tracks near their campsite, too large to be human, too straight to be bear. Each report came from somewhere near that same valley, the same stretch of woods where I'd found the cave. By late May, I was assigned to investigate again. Part of me wanted to refuse, but the other part, the ranger in me, needed to know, needed to face whatever was there. When I arrived at the ridge, the air had that strange, familiar heaviness again, a stillness that told me the forest was listening. The sunlight filtered through the canopy in pale shards, and for a while it almost looked peaceful. I found the campsite easily, fire pit cold, food still hanging from a bare line, tents flattened. Whoever had been there had left in a hurry. Then I saw the prints. This time there were dozens, some deep, some shallow, as if whatever had made them had been pacing, circling. And in the center of the clearing, pressed into the soft earth, was something worse. A single handprint again, larger than before, its outline blurred as if whoever made it had been dragging their fingers across the ground. I crouched beside it, my hand hovering above the soil, and that same chill I'd felt in the cave crept up my spine. That sense of being watched. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, no sound, no wind, just the forest holding its breath again. And then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the trees, came that sound, the clicking. I stood up fast, heart pounding, and started backing away toward the trail. The clicking grew louder, sharper, almost like laughter now. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to keep moving slowly, eyes on the shadows between the trees. And that's when I saw it. Just for a second, between the trunks, something tall, pale, almost blending with the birch bark. Its shape was wrong, too long in the limbs. Head slightly tilted as if curious, it moved, quick, fluid, and vanished behind the trees. I ran. I don't remember how far. I don't remember when I stopped. But when I did, I realized something that froze me to my core. The ground beneath me was covered in fresh prints. My own tracks ended 10 feet back, but ahead, leading forward, deeper into the woods, were those same long, narrow footprints I'd seen that first morning. Leading nowhere. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the prints like they were some kind of cruel joke the forest was playing on me. The trail was soft from rain the night before. Each step I took should have left a perfect mark, but mine had just stopped. It was as if the earth itself had decided to erase me halfway through a step. But the other prints, those long, narrow ones, continued on, one after another, deeper into the trees. The longer I looked, the more they seemed to pulse in my vision. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was lightheaded, but they were still there, clear as anything. My radio crackled suddenly, a burst of static that nearly made me drop it. I grabbed it, thumbed the button, and said, "Station, this is Ranger 3. Do you copy?" Nothing. Just static. And under it, something else. A low, rhythmic sound, muffled, almost like the same clicking I'd heard before, but slower. It was coming through the speaker, faint but deliberate, as if someone or something was tapping the microphone on the other end. I froze, staring at the device, listening to it echo into the trees around me. The sound in the radio and the sound in the forest were the same. That's when I realized I wasn't hearing it through the radio anymore. It was behind me. I turned fast, my flashlight slicing through the trees. Nothing. Just the empty stretch of birch and pine. The forest was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I started backing up again, slow, scanning the trees, every nerve burning. Then the clicking started again, closer this time, sharper. It wasn't behind me anymore. It was above me. I looked up. At first, I didn't see anything, just a dark canopy, branches swaying slightly in the windless air. Then something shifted, a shape moving where it shouldn't have been able to move. The outline was faint, almost blending with the branches, but I could make out long, thin limbs, bent wrong. The thing was clinging to the trunk of a tree like a spider, its face pressed against the bark. For a moment, I thought it was wearing something, maybe a mask. But then it turned, and I saw that it wasn't a mask at all. Its skin was pale, stretched thin across bone. Its mouth opened just slightly, and the sound came again, clicking, but now I could see it was its teeth, tapping together in rhythm like it was mimicking speech. I stumbled back, slipped on the wet ground, and my flashlight fell. The beam swung wildly across the forest floor before landing on a set of prints, fresh right beside me. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the light, and when I looked back at the tree, it was gone. The forest swallowed it whole. I ran again. I don't know how far or how long. The forest at night feels endless, and the deeper you go, the more it feels like it's rearranging itself around you. My compass spun aimlessly, and the landmarks I thought I knew didn't line up anymore. The trees all looked the same age, same pattern, same silence. I stopped once to catch my breath and realized I could no longer hear the creek. No water, no birds, no wind. I was alone in a forest that had forgotten sound. Eventually, I saw a flicker of light through the trees, a reflection. I pushed toward it, hoping it was the truck. But when I reached the clearing, it wasn't the truck's headlights. It was a small lantern, burning low, sitting in the snow. It looked old, rusted metal, glass cracked, but it burned steady. Beside it was something half buried in the dirt. I knelt down and brushed away the snow. It was a ranger badge. For a second, I didn't process it. Then I saw the nameplate. I knew the name. It belonged to a ranger who'd gone missing 8 years earlier. He'd been part of a search team that vanished while looking for a lost hiker not far from here. They never found a body, just a torn sleeve and some shredded equipment. The lantern flickered once, and the flame went out. The darkness came back fast, swallowing everything. And in that moment, I heard a sound that didn't belong to the forest at all. Something low, like a voice trying to form words it didn't understand. It was behind me again. I didn't turn this time. I just ran, guided by instinct alone, crashing through brush and branches until I hit a slope and tumbled halfway down it. I landed hard, my leg twisting under me, pain shooting up my side. The world spun, the flashlight flickering beside me. I crawled toward it and froze when I saw what lay ahead. The cave. The same one. Only now it looked different. Wider somehow. The darkness inside wasn't just an absence of light. It felt alive. I could hear movement deep inside, like something breathing, slow and heavy. And the footprints, the long, narrow prints, led right into it. I should have run the other way. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, to crawl back to the truck, to pretend I'd never seen any of this. But I couldn't. Something about that cave felt like a question that had been waiting too long for an answer. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was madness. Maybe I just needed to know what it wanted from me. I limped toward the mouth of the cave. The air that poured out of it was cold enough to sting. It smelled faintly of iron and wet soil. I stepped inside, the beam of my flashlight shaking as it cut through the black. The walls glistened again, and the sound of dripping water echoed off the stone. Then I heard something new. A whisper. It wasn't a word. Not exactly, but it carried rhythm, like language trying to form. I followed it, deeper and deeper, until I reached the chamber where I'd seen the handprint before. It was still there, darker now, the mud around it smeared into strange patterns. And then I saw the footprints, hundreds of them, some leading in, some leading out, some overlapping so thickly they almost formed shapes, circles, spirals, symbols. I shone the light across the wall, and that's when I saw them. Names. Dozens of names carved into the rock, some faded, some fresh. Every one of them had a ranger badge number beside it. I ran my hand across one and felt something warm seep from the groove, fresh mud. Someone had carved it recently. And then I saw the last one, my name. The mud around the letters was still wet. I dropped the flashlight. It rolled, the beam spinning wildly across the chamber, and for just a second before it went dark, I saw a shape move between the carvings. Tall, narrow, limbs too long, face half hidden by shadow. It was standing at the back of the cave, watching me. I ran. I don't know how I found my way out, but somehow I did. When I stumbled into daylight again, I collapsed into the snow, gasping. The forest looked the same, quiet, still, as if nothing had happened. When I got back to the station, the other rangers said I'd been gone for nearly 2 days. They'd been looking for me, found my truck abandoned near the ridge. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come. Every time I started, I could feel something in my throat tighten, like my own voice didn't want to remember. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I've transferred to another post far from Montana, but sometimes late at night, I still hear it. The clicking. Faint, deliberate, just outside the cabin. I never open the door. I just lie there listening until the sound fades. And once last winter, when I woke to find snow piled against the window, I saw something pressed into the glass. A handprint. Long fingers smeared with black mud. I went outside the next morning. There were footprints in the snow again. The same kind, leading away from the cabin. And just like before, they'd nowhere. I didn't tell anyone about the handprint on the window. After a while, you learn what kinds of stories are better left unspoken, because once you say them out loud, they stop being stories. They become invitations. But I couldn't stop thinking about that cave, and about the names carved into the wall. My name among them. The question that's haunted me ever since is when it was carved. Before I went in, or after? I'd told myself it must have been after, that maybe whatever was in there wanted to mark me, claim me in some way. But deep down I wasn't sure. I started having dreams not long after that winter, always the same. I'm walking through the forest, snow falling so thick it muffles every sound, and ahead of me are those footprints, leading nowhere, just as before. I follow them until I reach the cave. The air is cold, but I can feel heat coming from the darkness inside, like breath. And then, when I'm about to step in, I hear a voice. Sometimes it sounds like mine, sometimes like someone I used to know, sometimes like something else entirely. It says, "You never left." And that's when I wake up. I tried everything to quiet it. Moved cabins, transferred to different ranger districts, took night patrols just to keep my mind occupied. But the silence out here, it has a way of amplifying whatever you're trying to bury. You can't outrun your own echo in the woods. Last spring, I got a call from a ranger I'd worked with years ago, someone still stationed near Elk Valley. He said they'd found something during a survey near the ridge, a cave. When he described it, I knew it was the same one. He said it wasn't on any of their maps, and they thought it might have opened recently after a landslide. I asked him what made them notice it. He said, Footprints. Human, we think. But they stop at the entrance. And there's this smell, man. Like metal and moss. The whole place feels wrong. I told him not to go inside, to mark the location, seal it off, report it as unsafe terrain. He laughed it off, said I was being paranoid. But 2 days later, I got another call. They couldn't find him. His truck was still at the site. His radio, too. But no sign of him. They searched for a week before the snow came back and buried the trail. That night, I found myself staring at the forest outside my cabin again. The wind was moving through the pines in that slow, steady rhythm that sounds almost like breathing. I could feel the pull again. That same pressure I'd felt years ago, that quiet invitation. I don't think it ever make it wanted to be remembered. I know how that sounds. But when you spend enough time out here, you start to realize the forest isn't just alive. It remembers. It holds things. Not just bones and roots and echoes, but every lost hiker, every whispered fear, every drop of blood that's ever fallen into the soil. The forest keeps them all, and sometimes it gives them back. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things again. Small at first, my compass spinning when I wasn't near any magnetic fields. The radio cutting to static at the same time each night. The faint smell of wet stone and iron seeping through the cracks in the floorboards. Then one evening, while I was out checking a fire break near the tree line, I saw it again. Not the creature, not fully, but a glimpse of movement between the trees. Pale, long, fluid, watching. The air turned heavy, like the forest was holding its breath again, and I could feel that same electric stillness crawl up my neck. I didn't move, I just whispered, "What do you want from me?" The answer didn't come as words. It came as sound. Click, 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 slow, careful, familiar, and then, from the fog beyond the pines, I heard something else. My name. Spoken in my own voice. I ran back to the cabin, locked the door, sat there all night with the radio off, the flashlight on, the shotgun beside me. But the sound didn't follow. Just the silence, heavier than before. The next morning, I went out to check the ground near the tree line. The snow there was untouched, except for one thing, a single set of footprints leading right up to the door of my cabin. They weren't mine, and they didn't lead away. That was the moment I realized this thing, whatever it was, didn't belong to that forest anymore. It had followed me. It carried the memory of that cave, the names, the darkness. It had marked me once, and maybe that mark was enough. I started writing everything down after that. Every detail I could remember, every sound, every footprint, every strange shift in the air. Not because I think writing will protect me, but because I think remembering might. I think forgetting is what it wants. I've thought a lot about those names carved into the wall. Maybe they weren't victims. Maybe they were witnesses. People who saw the truth of that place and left something behind so they wouldn't disappear completely. Maybe that's what the footprints mean. A trace of something caught between worlds. Sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, I can almost hear it breathing outside again. The same slow, deliberate rhythm, like it's waiting for me to open the door. I never do. But part of me wonders, what would happen if I did? Would it take me back? Would I find myself standing in that cave again, staring at the wall with my name freshly carved? Or would I just see the footprints fade, one by one, until the last one ends right where I'm standing? Maybe that's the lesson this place has been trying to teach me all along, that the forest doesn't need to chase us. It just waits. It lets us come to it step by step until we find ourselves standing where the ground forgets us. Because in the end, that's what those footprints really are, a record of the moment before you disappear. Proof that you were once here, that you walked far enough into the dark for the forest to finally remember your name. And maybe one day, someone else will find them. They'll follow them the way I did. And when they reach the place where the tracks stop, when they kneel down in the silence and wonder where the next step went, they'll realize what I finally did. That some paths don't end because something vanished. They end because something found its way back. There's a kind of quiet that settles over the forest just before dawn. It isn't the peace people imagine when they think of nature. It's heavier, almost mournful. It's the quiet of everything holding its place, waiting for light to decide what still belongs and what should fade away. I've come to understand that feeling in a way I never wanted to. For most of my life, I believed the woods were neutral. Dangerous, sure, but fair. If you respected them, they respected you. If you listened, they'd tell you what they wanted you to know. But that was before I realized that some parts of the forest don't want to be understood. They don't follow the rules of light and shadow, predator and prey. They exist in the in-between, where sound turns to silence, where tracks end without reason, where your own reflection looks like it's waiting for you to blink first. The footprints were never really about proof. They were a message, a reminder that the wilderness doesn't end at the edge of our maps, and that some paths are meant only to be felt, not followed. I still work the job, still walk the perimeter, still check the trails at sunrise and mark the maps before nightfall. But I've changed. The other rangers say I'm quieter now, more deliberate. Maybe that's true. You can't go through something like that and come back untouched. Sometimes when I stop to rest on a ridge, I'll see my breath hanging in the air and imagine that somewhere, deep in the trees below, something else is doing the same, breathing in rhythm with me, unseen but aware. It doesn't scare me the way it used to. There's a strange comfort in it now, like knowing the forest is still watching, still remembering. People ask me sometimes why I keep doing this work, why stay out here after what I've seen. Why not move to the city, take a desk job, leave the woods behind? The truth is, I don't think I could. Because for all the fear, for all the nights I've spent staring into the dark, wondering if I was alone, the forest has also taught me something about what it means to be human. It showed me that courage isn't about standing in the light. It's about stepping into the dark when you don't know what's waiting there. It's about admitting that fear isn't the enemy. It's a compass. It points you toward the places that matter most, the places that test what's real in you. When I think back to that cave, I don't remember the terror first. I remember the silence right before it began, the sound of my own breath, steady and human against something ancient and unknowable. I remember realizing that no matter how deep the dark went, I still had a choice. To keep moving, to keep looking. That choice, the decision to keep walking, even when the path disappears, that's what defines us. Because maybe the footprints we leave behind aren't meant to be followed. Maybe they're just our way of saying, I was here. I faced the unknown, and I didn't turn back. If you ever find yourself out there, standing in the woods where the world goes quiet, listen closely, not for danger, not for answers, just listen. You might hear your own pulse echoing through the trees, reminding you that fear and wonder are the same thing wearing different names. That's the truth I learned the hard way, that the forest, the real forest, doesn't live in the trees or the soil. It lives in the space between your heartbeat and the dark. And when the tracks finally end, when there's no clear way forward, maybe that's where you're meant to stop, to breathe, to understand that not everything that disappears is lost. Some things just become part of the silence. And maybe when it's my time to vanish into that quiet, when the snow falls thick enough to hide my last steps, I hope someone finds those prints. I hope they pause long enough to wonder who left them, where they were going, and why they stopped. And I hope they realize what I finally did, that every footprint, even the ones that lead nowhere, begins with a step toward the unknown, because that's what it means to be alive, to walk until the world stops making sense, to listen when everything tells you not to face the dark and say, I'm still here. That's all any of us ever really leave behind. A path that reminds someone else not to be afraid to take their next step. So if you find yourself one day standing in the woods, staring at a line of footprints fading into nothing, don't be afraid to follow them. Don't be afraid of where they end, because maybe, just maybe, that's where something begins. I've walked every trail in this park, or at least I thought I had. That's the thing about wilderness. It changes when you're not looking. Paths vanish under snowfall, rivers reroute themselves after storms, and even the trees seem to shift position in the night. But this was different. This was a trail that wanted to be found. My name isn't important. What matters is that I've worked as a ranger here in the Northern Rockies for over a decade. I came for the quiet, the air so clean it hums when you breathe it in. I stayed because I believed in the land, believed it could heal people. But the truth is, some places don't want to be healed. Some parts of the forest remember too much. It started near the end of spring when the runoff made the rivers loud and everything smelled alive. I was posted near the western ridge, a remote sector where the forest drops into old glacial valleys. That morning, I got a radio call. A group of hikers claimed they'd found a path that wasn't on the visitor's map. They followed it for hours before the forest closed in, as they put it, and they couldn't find their way back. By the time I met them at the ranger station, they looked shaken, faces sunburned, eyes darting like animals fresh from a trap. One of them, a woman maybe in her 30s, grabbed my sleeve as I logged their report. "Don't go there," she whispered. "It's not supposed to be there." I tried to laugh it off. Missing trails aren't rare around here. Deer runs, game trails, logging cuts long since swallowed by the woods. But she looked past me through the station window like something was still following her out there. That night I looked over the park maps, both the public ones and the old survey versions we keep locked in the drawer. Nothing. No trail near where they described, just a dense section of conifers and steep, unstable ground. But there was a mark, faint and smudged, like someone had drawn a thin line with a trembling hand and then erased it. The next morning, I hiked out to where the group said they started, an unmarked turnout along the ridge road. I found nothing unusual at first, just moss, pine needles, the smell of wet earth. But then the air changed. It's hard to explain. It wasn't colder, but thicker. My own breath felt damp. The forest grew quiet, and then all at once, I saw it. A narrow indentation through the undergrowth, subtle but deliberate, like something had brushed the earth flat over years. I should have marked it, reported it, followed protocol. Instead, I stepped forward. The trail descended fast, cutting through slopes that shouldn't have been walkable. It wound between old-growth pines whose roots buckled like ribs pressing up from beneath the soil. I remember thinking how wrong the light looked, shaded even though the canopy was thin. And the deeper I went, the more it felt like the forest was rearranging behind me. When I turned back, the path I just walked seemed smaller, swallowed by green. About half a mile down, I noticed something strange. Small stacks of stones, balanced in pairs every 50 feet or so. Each was made from the same kind of rock, smooth river stones that shouldn't have been here, miles from the nearest creek. I crouched to look closer, and that's when I heard it. A sound, not animal, not mechanical. It was a knock, 3 times, deep and hollow, echoing faintly through the trees. I froze. It didn't sound close, but not far either, like it was coming from beneath me. When you've spent years in the forest, you learn to listen. There's a difference between the sounds of nature and the sounds that don't belong. This didn't belong. I radioed base, just trying to stay calm. West Ridge sector investigating possible cave system. Do you copy? Static. Then faintly, copy. Except it wasn't the dispatcher's voice. I stopped breathing. For a second, I thought the voice had come from the radio. But no, the echo of it came from the trees. The same word repeating like the forest was learning how to speak. I turned around, ready to head back up, but the trail had vanished. I swear it had been right behind me. I stepped left, right, nothing but ferns and dark roots. My chest tightened. I don't panic easily, but in that moment, I felt something pressing down on me, like gravity had thickened. Then I saw it. Ahead, the trail had split open, not like a landslide, but like the ground itself had been peeled back. A fissure, wide enough to crawl through, breathing cool air that smelled like rust and stone. Every instinct told me to leave, but another part of me, the part that keeps rangers alive, the part that needs to understand, made me crouch down and shine my flashlight inside. The beam hit something carved, lines, symbols, maybe pictographs, maybe something older. They looked almost like eyes. I told myself I'd just look for a moment, but when I crawled in, the light dimmed, not from lack of batteries, but as if the air itself was eating it. Inside, the knocking started again. This time it was close, right behind me. I swung around, but my beam only hit rock. I was alone. And then the echo came again, my own voice, repeated faintly from the dark. West Ridge Sector. The same words I'd spoken into the radio. Something was down there. Listening. Repeating. Learning. I crawled backward fast, scraping my elbows against the rock. When I finally broke into daylight, my lungs burned. I didn't stop until I reached the road. When I checked my GPS, it said I was 2 miles north of where I'd started. No trail led to that point. Nothing but trees. I filed a report that evening, kept the details vague, unstable terrain, possible illegal excavation. But that night when I closed up the station, I heard the radio crackle again. Static, then a voice. Mine, whispering the same phrase over and over, "It's not supposed to be there." The following week, I went back, officially this time, with another ranger, someone I trusted. His name was Harris. We joked to keep it light, but I could tell he felt it too. The air, the weight of the forest. We found the same indentation in the brush. He walked ahead, marking the trees with orange tape as we went. After about half an hour, he said, "You sure this is the spot? GPS says we're walking in circles." I checked my map. He was right. The trail wasn't leading anywhere. It curved back on itself like a spiral. That's when we heard it again, the knocking. 3 times. Then silence. Harris thought it was an animal, maybe a woodpecker or falling branch, but there was no echo, no follow-up noise, just those 3 knocks. He moved ahead, scanning with his flashlight, even though it was midday. "There's a rock face here," he said. "Looks like a cave-in." But it wasn't a cave-in. It was that same fissure. Only now it was bigger. Big enough to walk into. When I looked at Harris, he had that same uneasy expression I'd seen on the hikers' faces, the look of someone realizing they're standing somewhere they shouldn't exist. "Let's mark it," I said. "We'll come back with a team." But Harris stepped forward before I could stop him. "I just want to take a look inside." He ducked in, his flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Then it flickered. "Harris?" No answer. "Harris!" The beam went out completely. Then, 3 knocks from inside the cave. I froze at the mouth of that fissure, staring into the darkness that had swallowed Harris. My instincts screamed at me to back away, to turn and run for the ridge road. But there's a kind of silence in a moment like that, a silence that feels alive, pressing against your eardrums, waiting for your next move. I took 1 cautious step closer. "Harris," I called again, trying to steady my voice. "You okay in there?" Something moved. Not footsteps. Something dragging, slow, uneven, like cloth against stone. Then came the sound of breath, not heavy or panicked, just deliberate, too measured to belong to him. I raised my flashlight, but the beam wouldn't penetrate the dark. It seemed to bend away, eaten by it. My pulse was pounding so loud I could hear the blood moving through my ears. I was about to take another step when I heard him, Harris's voice, but something was wrong. "Found something," he said. His tone was flat, mechanical. "Come see." Every muscle in my body went tight. There was no echo to his words, though the rock walls should have bounced them back. I tried to radio him. No response. I turned to mark the nearest tree for a search crew, but when I looked down, the orange tape we'd been using was gone. Every strip, every mark. Even the knife cuts on the trunks had disappeared, as if the forest had healed itself while we weren't watching. I forced myself back to the fissure. The air that seeped out was cold and metallic, with a strange sweetness underneath, like rot mixed with perfume. Then I saw it, the faint outline of Harris's light deep inside, swaying back and forth. It was moving too smoothly, too rhythmically. I called out again, and the light froze. That's when I heard it, Harris's voice again, but this time from behind me. "Hey," it said. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through nothing but trees and mist. My breath caught. The forest looked different, denser. I couldn't even see the ridge now. Then another knock, 3 times. The sound was so close it rattled the air. I swung my light back toward the fissure. The beam hit something pale. Skin, or what looked like skin. An arm, maybe, reaching out of the darkness, the fingers brushing the edge of the rock before slipping back inside. That was enough. I ran. I didn't care about the direction, didn't look at the GPS, didn't stop until my lungs burned and my knees nearly buckled. When I finally dared to stop and check the coordinates, I was 3 miles from the ridge road, again in a place that shouldn't have existed. No trail, no path, just trees, older and thicker than the ones near base. And something else, something carved into a nearby trunk. The same symbols I'd seen in the cave. A circle of lines intersecting like a crude compass, but the directions didn't match true north. It was pointing somewhere deeper. I turned off the radio. For the first time in my career, I didn't want to be found. I waited there until dusk, when the forest went quiet in that strange way it does before dark, like it's listening. The wind stopped and the smell changed again, that metallic sweetness threading through the air. Then, through the fading light, I saw movement between the trees, someone walking, or trying to. It was Harris. He moved like he'd forgotten how to use his body, each step jerky, unbalanced, his head tilted slightly to one side, his arm hanging limp. "Harris!" I shouted, standing up, relief flooding through me. He stopped. Slowly, his head turned in my direction, though the rest of him didn't move. The distance between us was maybe 50 yards, but I could see his face, pale, expressionless, eyes wide open. Then his mouth moved. It didn't open all the way, just enough for the sound to come out. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't his hands making it. It was the sound of his voice, shaping itself into the rhythm. I took one step backward. He took one forward. His flashlight was still in his hand, swinging loosely, but the beam pointed behind him, illuminating nothing but the darkness he'd come from. "Stay where you are," I said, raising my voice. "You're disoriented. We'll get help." He kept moving, slower now, deliberate. And then, under the knocking, I heard something else. My own voice. West Ridge sector, repeating, faintly, perfectly timed with each of his steps. I turned and ran again, this time aiming uphill. The terrain didn't make sense. It rose and fell in impossible angles. My boots slid through mud that hadn't been there earlier. I tried not to think about the direction, just focused on the rhythm of my breath. Eventually, I stumbled onto an old service road, half buried in grass and pine needles. My knees hit the dirt hard. I looked behind me. Nothing. Harris was gone. By the time I reached base, it was well past midnight. The night guard found me sitting by the radio, mud up to my thighs, hands shaking. They called in a search team at dawn. They never found Harris. But 3 days later, the fissure was gone. Not collapsed, gone. The ground was smooth, the soil undisturbed, like it had never existed. They closed that section of the park indefinitely, citing unstable geological activity. No one asked questions. They rarely do when the forest swallows something. But a month later, I got a new radio unit, freshly tuned, cleared for static. The first night I turned it on, a familiar frequency crackled through the speaker. West Ridge sector, my own voice. Then, 3 knocks. I started keeping a journal after that, not for reports or protocol, just notes. Small things I couldn't say aloud. The park began changing in ways I couldn't quantify. Landmarks subtly off, trail markers facing the wrong way, paths leading to places they hadn't before. Even the wildlife avoided certain areas. One morning, I found a set of footprints along the service road. Bare feet, small like a child's, but they sank too deep into the soil. The stride was long, uneven, almost dragged. When I followed them, they led to the same valley where the fissure had been. There, in the clearing, I found something that made my stomach turn. A pile of orange survey tape, torn, tangled, and damp. And on the largest piece, written in mud, were 3 words, "It found you." I didn't go back to that clearing for weeks after that. The park had grown restless, the kind of restlessness you can't see, but you feel. The air hung heavy with pine resin and wet moss, and the birds avoided the canopy above the western ridge entirely. Even the wind changed course when it passed through that part of the forest, carrying a low, almost human tone. But my job wasn't to believe in curses or whispers. It was to protect hikers, maintain trails, and keep order in a place older than memory. Still, every time I closed my eyes, I saw that writing again. It found you. The message shouldn't have been possible. The mud had dried like paint, as if whoever or whatever had written it wanted it to last. I tried convincing myself it was some prank, a local kid messing around or a poacher marking territory, but there were no prints nearby, no sign of anyone at all. A week later, dispatch called about a missing hiker, a solo backpacker mid-40s who'd failed to return to camp. Last known coordinates near the old glacial valley, my valley. I volunteered to check it out. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I just needed to see if the fisher was truly gone. The morning I went out was gray and quiet, the kind of quiet that sits in your bones. The fog had rolled low, curling between the trees like smoke. My radio crackled intermittently, not with static, but with faint breath sounds, too human to be interference, too irregular to be normal transmission. I told myself it was atmospheric distortion. High humidity does strange things to sound. By mid-afternoon, I reached the edge of the old site. The clearing looked the same as before, but the trees felt different. They leaned ever so slightly inward, as if they were listening. The ground was smooth, no sign of the fissure, but something darker stained the soil in a wide semicircle. I crouched to touch it. The earth was warm. That's when I noticed the footprints again. Not one set this time, several, all barefoot, some small, some wide, but none perfectly human. They curved around the clearing, forming an imperfect ring, and at the center of that ring was a single object half buried in dirt. It was a radio. Harris's radio. I picked it up with trembling hands. The casing was cracked, the frequency dial frozen midway. The speaker was full of mud, but when I brushed it off and clicked it on, the static hissed and then cleared. For a moment, there was nothing. Then came a voice, thin, warbling, layered like multiple recordings overlapping. "Help me." Then quieter. "It's still down here." My hand went cold around the device. "Harris?" I said into it, my voice shaking. No answer. The radio crackled again, and I swear, I heard myself. My own voice, speaking words I hadn't said yet. "Don't come closer." The fog thickened until the clearing disappeared. I could barely see my own boots. That's when the ground beneath me trembled. Not an earthquake, more like something shifting, breathing, deep under the soil. I backed away slowly. Then came the knocking. Not from the ground this time, from the trees. 3 knocks, then 3 more from another direction, then 3 more, closer still. It wasn't random. It was moving in a circle around me. My flashlight flickered as I tried to locate the sound. That's when I saw it, the shape standing just beyond the fog line. Tall, thin. Not human in the way we understand human. Its outline shimmered, as if the air around it was vibrating. I couldn't make out a face, just a vertical slit where a mouth might have been. And yet when it spoke, the words came from everywhere at once. "You followed the wrong trail." I stumbled backward, tripping over roots. "Who are you?" I demanded, though my voice came out smaller than I intended. The figure tilted its head, the movement fluid but wrong. "You drew the line," it said. "You made the map." It took a step forward, and my knees nearly gave out. The ground beneath it wasn't reacting. No footprints, no sound. I raised the radio like a shield. "Stay back," I said. "I'll call in a rescue team." The figure stopped. Then, from its chest, or somewhere inside it, I heard Harris's voice. Clear, desperate, unmistakable. "Don't let it map you." The forest erupted in knocks, faster this time, overlapping until they became a solid pulse, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. I dropped the radio and ran. Branches clawed my face, my uniform tore, but I didn't stop. The sound followed, behind, beside, ahead of me, impossible directions, like the forest itself was echoing the movement. When I finally broke through the tree line, I found myself standing on a road I didn't recognize. The fog had thinned, revealing a valley I'd never seen before. Steep cliffs, black pines, and a river that gleamed like oil. I checked my GPS, my compass, both spinning. The screen flickered numbers that made no sense, coordinates that jumped continents. I turned in circles, searching for any landmark, but all I found were trees. And the faint outline of a trail I didn't remember walking. It wound downhill, perfectly carved, leading toward the dark river. I should have stayed where I was. I should have waited for daylight. But exhaustion and fear make strange companions. They convince you to move just to feel alive. So I followed. The trail narrowed, then opened into a small gorge where the river ran slow and deep. The water reflected the sky like glass, but my reflection wasn't there. Instead, I saw Harris standing knee-deep in the current, staring up at me. He raised his hand, not to wave, but to point. Behind me, I turned. There was no forest anymore, only fog. Then a voice, mine again, whispered right by my ear, "It found you." I don't remember much after that. They said a rescue team found me near the park boundary, barefoot, clothes torn, covered in mud. They said I'd been missing for 2 days, but when they brought me back, my GPS logs didn't make sense. They showed coordinates that didn't exist on any known map, places miles outside the park's boundary, deep in terrain that hasn't been surveyed since the 1800s. When I checked the latest park maps, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a new trail, faint, unmarked, running directly across the valley where the fissure used to be. And at the bottom of the legend, in the smallest text, someone had written a note. Trail under review. Reported by staff ranger, except I hadn't reported it, and when I tried to delete it from the digital record, the system wouldn't let me. It said, file locked. Active field survey in progress, the timestamp, tomorrow's date. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the ranger station with the map open under the desk lamp, the paper glowing pale and fragile like something alive. Every detail looked right. The contour lines, the elevation, the streams, except for that one faint line cutting across the western valley. It shouldn't exist. The map had always been my safety net. I could orient myself anywhere with it. But staring at that new trail, one drawn in a soft gray line as though by an unseen hand, I felt a kind of vertigo, like I was standing on the edge of something that didn't belong to this world. At midnight, the radio clicked on by itself. West Ridge Sector. The words came softly, calm, and exactly in my voice. Then, 3 knocks. I turned off the unit, unplugged it, even pulled the battery. It kept speaking. Trail under review. Then again, quieter. Report by staff ranger. It sounded almost bureaucratic, mechanical. But I heard breathing underneath it, faint and deliberate, like someone was whispering right into the mic from the other side of the static. I left the station before dawn, taking only my flashlight and the printed map. I told myself I wasn't going back there, but that was a lie. There's something magnetic about unfinished things, especially when they carry your name. The forest was still as I started along the ridge road, the world gray and unformed in the early light. My boots sank into wet moss. Every sound felt amplified, the crunch of gravel, the crack of a twig, even the pulse in my ears. The air smelled faintly of iron. By sunrise, I reached the point marked on the new trail. And there it was. A perfect entrance carved between 2 ancient pines, their trunks grown together at the base, forming a kind of natural archway. The ground beneath was smooth, cleared of debris, as if recently traveled. The fog hung low, coiling around the entrance like breath. For a moment, I just stood there, my hand hovering over my radio. Every part of me said no, but curiosity, or whatever passes for it when fear wears a disguise, pushed me forward. The forest felt different inside the trail. The light was wrong again, filtered through a haze that didn't move with the wind. My steps made no sound. Even the birds stayed silent. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell of wet stone became, though there were no rocks in sight. Half a mile in, I found a tree with markings, familiar symbols etched into the bark, the intersecting compass lines I'd seen before. Except now they glowed faintly, a dull gray sheen like ash, and beneath them, carved cleanly into the wood, was my name. I stopped breathing. My mind scrambled for explanations. Graffiti, prank, coincidence. But I knew the truth deep down. This trail was recording me. Every step, every thought, every doubt. I took another step forward, and the forest responded, a knock, 3 times, from beneath the ground. Then my flashlight flickered, catching something pale between the trees, a shape, human or close enough to pass for one. It moved parallel to me, keeping pace, always just outside the beam. I slowed, it slowed. I stopped, it stopped. When I turned the light toward it, the shape vanished. Then came the voice, carried on the wind. Still mapping. My knees nearly gave out. The voice was flat, emotionless, but there was something terrible underneath it, like layers of speech recorded over decades, all trying to speak through one throat. I ran. Branches tore at my sleeves as the forest blurred past. The trail twisted and folded in on itself, every turn leading me back to the same clearing where I'd started. The compass spun. My sense of direction dissolved. Then I saw it. The ground ahead of me split open again. Not wide this time, but deep. The fissure. Back where it didn't belong. The air pouring out was freezing. My breath came in white clouds, and beneath that frost-bitten current, I heard movement, soft shuffling like something rearranging itself inside the earth. A shape rose from the dark, not climbing but unfolding. I should have run, but my legs refused. I was caught between awe and terror. It stood there at the mouth of the fissure, taller than before, its outline shifting like smoke, its edges flickering in and out of focus. Its face, or what it used as one, seemed carved from the same symbols on the trees, lines moving across a surface that wasn't solid, as though it was wearing the forest itself as a mask. "You made the path," it said, the words layered over my own voice. "Now you walk it." I stumbled backward, shaking my head. "I didn't make anything." It stepped forward, its feet, or shadows of them, leaving no impression on the dirt. Every map maker leaves something behind, a reflection, a pattern. The trail doesn't vanish when you stop walking. It learns. The air around me thickened, pulsing with invisible rhythm, knocks without sound, vibrations in the lungs. My flashlight blinked once and died. The only light left came from the faint gray glow of the markings beneath the thing's face. Then, from within its chest, another light flickered. A headlamp. Harris's. He was inside it. Or what was left of him. His face pressed against the shifting surface like a trapped thought, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. Then it was gone again, sinking beneath the rippling surface as the figure moved closer. I turned and ran into the dark. I don't remember how far or how long. My mind fractured into flashes, bark tearing my hands, roots catching my boots, the endless sound of knocking following me like a heartbeat. When I finally broke through to sunlight, the world was wrong. The ridge road was gone. In its place was a narrow path bordered by stones, small, round, and perfectly balanced in pairs. The same kind I'd seen that first day. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, and looked behind me. The forest swayed as though exhaling. The fissure was gone again. And in the dirt beside me, drawn by some unseen hand, were 3 words written in ash. Trail completed. They transferred me out of that park not long after. Officially, I'd suffered a neurological episode brought on by isolation stress. Unofficially, they didn't want me talking. I've since worked in smaller parks, mostly administrative now, but some nights when I pull up topographic data or maintenance records, I see it. Small anomalies, unregistered routes marked under review. Sometimes they appear near rivers, sometimes near cliffs, always near places people disappear. And when I trace those coordinates, each one connects, forming a network of thin gray lines that doesn't match any official system. They converge in one place, the Western Ridge. Every few months I get a call from a number with no ID. When I answer, there's only static. Then, 3 knocks and a whisper, barely audible beneath it, using my voice to say, "Trail under review." I still remember the first night I set foot in that campground. It wasn't fear that hit me first. It was silence. The kind of silence that presses into your chest, that has a weight to it. I'd worked as a ranger for nearly 12 years by then, across 6 different forests in 3 different states. I thought I'd seen everything. Bear encounters, lost hikers, night fires that glow like living veins across the mountain. But I'd never known silence like that before. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. My name's Evan, 42 years old. I'd just been reassigned to the Red Hollow district of northern Idaho, a sprawling, thickly forested region with a reputation among rangers as a revolving door. The joke was that no ranger lasted longer than a single night at Camp Arrowhead. I thought that was just the usual small-town superstition. Rangers love to spook each other with stories when they're stationed deep in the backcountry. Keeps the mind sharp, they say, keeps you humble. But there was something about Arrowhead that didn't feel like a joke when I arrived. The station itself was built in the 1950s, a creaking wooden structure with warped floors and a single floodlight that buzzed all night. The sign out front had long since lost its paint, and the trail markers around it were rotting. The place had been shut down twice over the years, once for a forest fire that never officially reached the site, and once for what they called psychological distress incidents. Nobody ever elaborated on that. When I met the district supervisor, an older ranger named Peterson, he handed me the keys and said, "Stay one night. You'll see why the others left." Then he drove off without another word. I laughed at the time, thinking he was trying to rattle me. But when his taillights vanished behind the pines, the laughter felt hollow in my throat. It was late afternoon when I unpacked my gear. The campground sat near the edge of a river valley, surrounded by dense spruce and cedar. The fire pits were cold, the picnic tables mossed over, and the ranger cabin smelled of damp wood and something else, something faintly metallic. The previous ranger's logbook sat open on the desk, just a few pages filled. The last entry was short. Open quote, "Can't sleep, keeps calling from the tree line, sounds like me." Close quote. That was it. I closed the book, told myself I'd seen worse. The sun dropped fast behind the ridge, and within an hour, the forest went black, the kind of black you can feel. Even the stars seemed distant. It started small, an odd rhythm from the woods. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 again. I figured it was a woodpecker or maybe a branch tapping against the trunk in the wind. But the air was still. Not a leaf moved. The knocks continued for hours, always the same pattern. When I stepped outside with my flashlight, it stopped. The moment I went back in, it began again. I wanted to believe it was some animal marking territory. But the longer it went on, the more deliberate it felt, like someone was waiting for me to react. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, I was exhausted but determined not to be the next name on that growing list of rangers who quit. I told myself I'd check the area, find the source of that sound, and prove it was nothing. The trail behind the cabin led to an old cave system about a half-mile out. Locals called it Whistler's Hollow. Supposedly, miners used it back in the late 1800s, but it had long since collapsed in parts. When I reached the entrance, the temperature dropped at least 10 degrees. The air smelled of wet stone and rust. I noticed something strange. Tiny piles of rocks arranged in neat circles just inside the cave mouth. I thought maybe kids or hikers had left them, but there were too many. Dozens of them, perfectly spaced. I crouched down to inspect one. The stones were smooth river pebbles, stacked in 3s, and every pile had a small notch carved into the top stone, a thin line, almost like a tally mark. I didn't go deeper. Not that day. I told myself I'd come back with proper gear, maybe some ground-penetrating radar, if it looked like an old shaft. But as I turned to leave, I heard it again, those 3 knocks. Only this time it came from inside the cave. I froze. My flashlight shook slightly. The knocks echoed off the walls, slow, deliberate. Then came a sound that didn't belong underground, something like a breath, long and shallow. I backed away step by step until I was back in the daylight. My pulse was pounding. I wanted to believe it was a trick of acoustics, maybe water dripping in rhythm. But then I noticed the footprints. They led from the cave entrance to where I was standing. Bare footprints, wide, deep in the damp soil. Human-sized, but not quite. The spacing between steps was too long, the pressure too heavy. That was the first time I thought about the old stories, the ones about the creature that stalked the northern forests. The thing people called Yeti, Sasquatch, Skookum, depending on where you were from. I'd never believed in it. But standing there, I wasn't so sure. I radioed Peterson that afternoon, told him I'd found signs of someone or something near the cave. He didn't sound surprised, just said, "Don't stay after dark. It gets loud then." Loud. That word stuck with me. When the second night fell, I kept the radio on. The forest was eerily still again, like it was listening. Then, sometime around midnight, a new sound joined the knocks, a low whistle. It drifted from the trees, soft at first, then rising and falling in pitch. It almost sounded human, like someone trying to mimic a tune but forgetting how it went halfway through. I gripped my flashlight, pointed it out the window. Nothing. The whistle moved, first to the left of the cabin, then the right, then impossibly behind me. When I turned, I saw something that still makes my throat tighten when I think of it. Through the reflection on the window pane, I could see a shape standing by the tree line, tall, motionless. The whistle stopped, and then from the radio, my voice. Open quote, "Evan, step outside." Close quote. I froze. The words repeated, exactly in my tone, exactly my cadence. Open quote, "Evan, step outside." Close quote. I tore the battery out of the radio, but the voice kept going for another 5 seconds before cutting off. I didn't step outside. I sat there till dawn, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. When morning came, there were prints again. Dozens this time, circling the cabin, always stopping just short of the door, and on the glass of the window, 3 smudged fingerprints, pressed from the outside. By then, I wasn't laughing anymore. I should have left right then, but pride's a strange thing. I told myself I'd last longer than the rest, that I wouldn't be driven out by fear or stories. That was my mistake. That afternoon, while hiking near the river, I found the remnants of an old ranger station, half collapsed, hidden in the undergrowth. Inside, everything was decayed, but one wall still had names etched into it, dozens of them, all park rangers. Some I recognized from files, others I didn't. Each name was followed by a date and a word. Left, gone, missing. The most recent date was just 2 months before I arrived. And next to that one, carved with something sharp, was a message. Open quote, "It comes for the one who stays." Close quote. When I read that, the forest went quiet again. Not peaceful quiet, more like the air before a storm. I could feel something watching me. I started walking back toward the cabin, every instinct screaming that I was being followed. At first, I thought it was paranoia. Then, I heard the whistle again, this time from directly behind me, and it was closer than ever. I didn't turn around at first. Something in me knew that if I did, if I gave whatever was behind me that acknowledgement, it would become real. The air around me felt thick, charged, as though the forest itself had been holding its breath since I stepped off the trail. I could hear the whistle again, softer now, almost hesitant. Then, the sound of a branch cracking under weight. A heavy, deliberate step. I gripped the handle of my knife without thinking, but it felt ridiculous. What good was a blade against something I couldn't even see? My heart was hammering so loud that it drowned out the river nearby. I told myself to walk, not run. Running in the forest is suicide. You lose your footing, break an ankle, and then you're really done. So I walked, every step measured, the weight of my boots pressing into the earth. The whistle stopped. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then, from ahead of me came another sound. 3 sharp knocks. That same pattern. Always 3. It echoed from the direction of the cabin like it had circled ahead of me somehow. The realization sent a chill straight through my spine. Whatever it was toying with me, moving faster than it should have been able to. I broke into a jog despite myself, the path narrowing as the underbrush closed in. I could see the outline of the cabin through the trees now, its shape distorted by the fading light. The sky was bruised purple, the last rays of sun cutting through the treetops like blades. And then I saw movement near the window, a tall silhouette just standing there, watching. I shouted, "Who's there?" Even though the words barely made it past my throat. No response. The shape didn't move, didn't flinch. I thought maybe it was my reflection again, the same trick that had fooled me before. But as I stepped closer, I realized the light angle was wrong. There was no reflection. Someone or something was inside my cabin. My hands were trembling when I reached for the door. It was already open, just slightly. I pushed it in with my foot, letting it creak on its hinges. The cabin was dark, the air colder than it had any right to be. My breath came out in white clouds. I scanned the room with my flashlight. Nothing moved. The radio sat dead on the table, the logbook still open where I'd left it. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it had been my imagination again. But then the light caught something on the floor. Wet prints. Bare footprints, just like before, leading from the window to the middle of the room. And there, right beside the prints, was a pile of 3 smooth stones stacked neatly together. I don't remember dropping the flashlight, but I remember the sound it made hitting the floor. I lunged for the door, slammed it shut, locked it, then shoved the desk against it for good measure. I stayed like that until night swallowed the forest whole. Around midnight, the knocking started again. Louder this time, closer. 3 sharp strikes against the wall, then silence. A minute later, 3 more. The sound moved slowly around the cabin, circling it like a predator testing a fence. Then came the voice again. "Evan, open the door." It wasn't from the radio this time. It came from just outside. My voice again. Exactly my voice. The cadence, the inflection, even the slight rasp from the cold. "Evan, it's safe now." I pressed my back to the wall, knife in hand, eyes locked on the door. "You said you'd stay," it continued. "You said you'd last longer than the others." Every hair on my neck stood on end. That line, it was something I'd said to Peterson earlier that day over the radio. There was no way anyone else could have heard it. The voice began to hum then, low and tuneless. It was the same whistling pattern I'd heard before, but broken, warped. It moved around the cabin, the boards creaking under weight I couldn't see. Then the knocking began again, this time from above. The roof groaned. Dust drifted down from the beams. Something was on top of the cabin, crawling. I remember whispering a prayer I hadn't said in 20 years. The knocking stopped, and for a while there was nothing but the sound of my heartbeat. Then, faint, almost imperceptible, I heard it whisper through the vent above the bed, "The cave. Come back to the cave." Then silence. I didn't move until dawn. When light finally broke through the cracks in the wood, I packed what little I had left and started walking toward the trailhead. I didn't care about my post or the keys or the damn logbook. I just needed to leave. But halfway down the trail, I stopped. The forest looked different. The trees seemed closer together, the path narrower, the air heavy. The usual sounds of morning, birds, water, wind, were gone. Just stillness. And when I looked down, I realized the trail wasn't leading me toward the road. It was bending. Gradually, subtly, back toward the cave. I turned around thinking I'd retraced my steps wrong. But when I walked back, every direction led me to the same place. The trees were changing around me, reshaping the trail like they were alive. By the time I reached the clearing, I could see the cave mouth yawning open again, the dark like a wound in the earth. The air carried that same metallic scent, stronger now. Something in me wanted to run, but another part, something deeper, primal, wanted to know. I'd come this far. I had to understand what was happening. I stepped closer, shining the light into the hollow. The stone piles were gone. In their place were indentations in the dirt, like something large had been crawling out. And then I saw the carvings, dozens of them, scratched into the stone walls, each one a single name, all the rangers who'd been stationed there. Each name paired with a mark, 3 vertical lines crossed once like tally marks. Except mine. My name wasn't carved yet, but there was a fresh patch of scraped stone waiting, smooth and empty. I don't remember the moment I dropped the flashlight, only the sound it made as it rolled into the darkness. Somewhere deep inside the cave, the knocking began again. 3. Pause. 3. Only this time the sound was coming closer. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, until my heel hit something soft. When I turned, I saw a ranger hat lying in the dirt. Faded, half buried. Inside it was a name tag. Peterson. That's when I ran. I didn't stop running until the forest broke open into the main road. My chest burned, my legs were shaking, and the world seemed to tilt. When I finally stumbled out, a truck was parked there, unmarked, engine running. A man in uniform stepped out, not Peterson, younger. His badge said U.S. Forestry Service. He looked me over and said, "You must be the new one from Arrowhead." My throat went dry. "New one?" I managed to choke out. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, we've been trying to reach your supervisor. He hasn't checked in for weeks." Weeks. Not days. Weeks. When I glanced at the date on his clipboard, I realized 3 weeks had passed since I'd arrived. I'd only counted 2 nights. I didn't argue. I just got in the truck and didn't look back. But as we drove off, I saw something through the tree line. A figure standing in the clearing, watching, and even from that distance, I could see it raise its hand, 3 slow taps against its chest. 3. Pause. 3. The same rhythm that had followed me from the first night. I closed my eyes. I didn't open them again until we hit the highway. But the worst part wasn't what I saw that night. It's what I heard later when the new ranger went out there. He lasted 1 night. And the last entry in his logbook was written in handwriting that looked exactly like mine. "It's calling again. Sounds like me." They said the station was decommissioned after that. The report blamed structural decay, mold exposure, psychological stress from isolation. That's how they bury these things. Tie it up in paperwork and call it a safety issue. But I know better. I know what's out there. I know what that, and I tried to move on after Arrowhead, took a desk assignment for a while reviewing incident logs from other districts. But the thing about silence, it follows you. Even in the city at night, when traffic hums and lights flicker through your window, there's a moment before you sleep when everything stops. And if you've ever lived through real silence, the kind that comes from the woods out there, you can hear it again. Under everything else, the forest doesn't let go. It just waits. That winter, I got a call from an old colleague, Marquez, a ranger I used to work with in Oregon. He sounded off, nervous, distracted. He said, "Evan, you ever hear of a place called Red Hollow? Up near Arrowhead?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard that name in months. I told him not to go. Whatever's there isn't meant to be studied or understood. He didn't listen. Said he had a team from the university with him, studying strange rock formations near the valley. He promised they'd only be out there 2 nights. 2 nights. He never came back. When the search team finally found the camp, everything was intact. Tents still zipped. Gear still packed. Even their coffee was still warm. But no one was there. No tracks leading away. Just 3 piles of stones beside each tent. Perfectly arranged. I didn't sleep for days after that. I thought maybe I was going crazy, that I'd let fear rewrite my memory of what happened at Arrowhead. So I requested access to the incident logs from that district. Official ones. It took a lot of strings to pull, but when I finally got them, I sat down in that dusty archive room and started reading. The first report was dated 1979. Ranger missing overnight, found barefoot by the cave, repeating the same phrase over and over. "It's not me. It's not me." He was institutionalized within a week. Then, 1986, 3 volunteers resigned after 1 night. They claimed they'd heard their own voices echoing through the trees. The department classified it as audio hallucination due to high stress. But it didn't stop there. Every decade, the same pattern. Different names, same result. The forest swallows them, one by one. And then I found something that shouldn't have been there at all. An old black and white photo clipped to the back of one file. It showed the original ranger station in the 1950s, a group of 5 men standing in front of it, smiling, proud. One of them looked exactly like me. I don't mean similar, I mean me. The same eyes. The same scar above the eyebrow from a childhood accident. The photo was dated 1954. I wasn't born until 1983. I don't remember dropping the folder, but I remember how the edges of the room seemed to blur for a moment, like the air around me warped. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I turned the photo over. On the back, someone had scrawled 3 symbols in faded ink. 3 vertical lines crossed once. the same mark I'd seen carved into the cave wall. That night, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in months. 3 knocks. Not from my door this time, from the window. I froze, staring at the glass. It was dark outside, the reflection faint. But just beyond it, I saw a shape. Tall, still, watching. And then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the distance, the whistle. I moved out of the city a week later, packed what little I had, and took a job in the Southern District, as far from Idaho as I could manage, somewhere dry, flat, open, desert country. No caves, no thick forests, no hiding places. For a while it worked. I told myself I'd outrun it, but the silence followed me even out there. The nights were different, emptier somehow. I'd sit by the fire, watching the light flicker on the sand, and for a moment I'd forget. Then I'd hear something faint on the wind. 3 short bursts, a rhythm, not knocking this time, just the wind shifting through dry brush. Still, my body reacted like it remembered. A year passed before I allowed myself back in the woods again. I'd been reassigned to assist with a wildfire response near the Montana border. I told myself this was different. Broad daylight, multiple crews, safety in numbers. The first night, I heard laughter from the next tent over. It was comforting. Reminded me that I wasn't alone. But then the latter changed, slowed down, and I realized it wasn't coming from any of the crew. It was coming from the tree line. I stepped out of my tent, flashlight in hand, scanning the forest edge. The others were asleep. The night was unnaturally still again. No wind, no insects, nothing, just silence. Then, from the shadows between 2 pines, I saw movement. Something tall, broad-shouldered, its outline barely visible. It didn't move like an animal. It swayed slightly, head tilted, like it was studying me. I aimed the flashlight directly at it, nothing there. Just trees. But when I turned back toward my tent, there was something waiting in front of it. 3 stones, stacked neatly. That was the moment I realized the truth. It wasn't the cave. It wasn't the forest. It wasn't even Red Hollow. It was me. Whatever that thing is, it follows the ones who stay. It learns them, becomes them. And once it has your name, once it's heard your voice, it doesn't need the forest anymore. It can find you anywhere. That night, I burned the ranger logs I'd taken. The old reports, the photo, everything. Thought maybe it would break the connection somehow. But as the papers curled in the flames, I saw words appearing in the ashes, etched as if by invisible hands. Open quote, "It's still your turn." Close quote. I left before dawn, drove until the gaslight came on, then kept driving. For weeks I slept in my truck, moving from one place to the next. Gas stations, motels, back roads. Never stayed in one spot more than a night. But here's the thing. No matter how far I go, every time I close my eyes, I see that same clearing, that same cave mouth yawning open like it's waiting for me, and somewhere deep inside, I can still hear it knocking. 3. Pause. 3. Sometimes I wonder if it's not calling me back, but calling me home. Because when I really think about it, I don't remember leaving the forest that last time. I remember running. I remember the truck, but I don't remember getting inside. Maybe I never did. Maybe I'm still there, walking those same trails, stuck in that same loop of silence, while something else wears my face out here in the world. Every night, I sit awake and listen, and sometimes when it gets very quiet just before dawn, I hear footsteps outside my door, then a knock. 3. Pause. 3. And a voice, calm and familiar. Open quote, "Evan, time to come back. I haven't opened the door in months." I moved into this cabin last winter, far from the parks, deep in the high plains of New Mexico. There's nothing but empty stretches of sagebrush and wind for miles. I thought the distance might keep it away, that the open sky and lack of trees could somehow dissolve the weight that had followed me since Idaho. I was wrong. The silence here is different, thinner, like a stretched-out version of what I remember from Red Hollow. It hums. Most nights I sit on the porch staring at the horizon. The stars out here are so sharp they look like they could cut you. And yet, beyond all that beauty, there's something else, something watching. I can't explain how I know. You feel it first as a change in temperature, a drop that doesn't belong. Then the faintest echo of rhythm on the wind. 3. Pause. 3. The sound isn't loud anymore. It's patient. It's learned to whisper. I've tried to convince myself it's a memory, a trick of trauma or guilt or exhaustion. I've read about shared delusions, about psychological projection. I've filled notebooks trying to explain the patterns, auditory hallucinations, stress response, residual fear. I list them like armor. But deep down, I know none of that matters, because it's not about the sound, it's about recognition. It's about remembrance. Last week, I got a letter from the Forestry Service. No return address, no signature, just a plain envelope that had somehow found me here, despite the fact that I never told them where I'd gone. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, open quote, site reopened, Camp Arrowhead, ranger assigned E. Nash. Close quote. That's my name, my full name. I stared at the page for a long time, my pulse rising. The date was recent, just 2 weeks ago. Someone had reopened the site. Someone had taken my place, or something had. That night, I dreamed I was back there, the cave, the clearing, the smell of wet stone and pine. I could hear the knocking again, faint but constant, echoing through the hollow like a heartbeat. I walked toward it, unable to stop myself. My hands were trembling, but my feet moved on their own. The deeper I went, the narrower the passage became until the walls scraped my shoulders. I could feel the cold pressing in, the weight of the earth above me. And then, from the dark ahead, I saw a light. My flashlight, the one I dropped that day, it flickered weakly on the ground, still glowing after all this time. I picked it up, and in that beam, I saw what had been waiting for me, a wall of carvings, hundreds of names, and beneath each one a hollowed imprint of a face, pressed into the stone as though the rock had once been soft, molded by human features. Mouths open, eyes blank, silent screams fossilized in the dark, and in the center of it all, mine. Not carved, fresh, alive. Its eyes moved. That's when I woke up. The room was freezing. My breath clouded the air, and outside the window, 3 faint shadows on the ground. Footprints. Bare. I didn't leave the cabin for 3 days after that. Didn't eat much either. My radio's been dead for weeks, and the generator fails more often than not. But I don't mind the dark anymore. It's familiar. Like the silence has finally settled into me, like it belongs there. Yesterday, I found something strange near the porch steps, a stack of 3 stones, smooth and white, balanced perfectly. No one's been within 50 miles of this place. The nearest town is a 2-hour drive down a dirt road, but there they were waiting for me when I stepped outside. I didn't touch them. I just stared. The wind was calm. The air was still. And from somewhere, impossible to tell where, I heard that low, broken whistle again. Not a warning. Not a call. Just a sound that wanted to be remembered. I sat down that night and started recording everything. Every sound, every memory, every dream. I thought maybe if I wrote it down, I could anchor myself to something real. But when I played the recording back, my voice wasn't the only one speaking. Between the static, another voice murmured. Deep, slow, open quote, you left it unfinished. Close quote, it said my name. Then, clear as day, it whispered coordinates, latitude and longitude. When I looked them up, they led straight to Red Hollow. I shut the laptop. I didn't sleep. I told myself I'd ignore it, that I'd stay here until it got bored, until the silence wore itself out. But the next night, I woke to the smell of pine needles and damp earth. Impossible smells in this desert. And through the crack of the door, I saw light flickering from the trees that shouldn't be there. I stepped outside. The air was wrong. The horizon that used to stretch for miles was gone. In its place, a wall of dark pines swayed gently in a wind I couldn't feel. The stars had vanished, the moon hidden behind a ceiling of cloud. I was back there, the forest had found me. The path was waiting, faintly lit by my own footprints pressed into the dirt ahead. I followed them. I didn't even think to stop. It was as if the ground itself was guiding me forward, whispering in rhythm with each step. 3. Pause. 3. The sound of knocking began again, not from ahead, but from below. The earth trembled lightly with each strike. Then the smell hit me. Wet iron, blood, and stone. When I reached the clearing, the cave mouth was open wider than before, like it had grown. The stones around it glistened, slick with moisture. I stood there for a long time, every part of me screaming to run, but the voice that came from inside was too familiar. Open quote, Evan, it's time. Close quote, my voice again, but calmer now, almost gentle. Open quote, you left something behind. Close quote. I took one step forward, then another. The darkness swallowed the light from my lantern, pulling it inward. My name echoed softly off the walls, overlapping in countless layers, if 100 versions of me were calling from the depths. For a moment, I thought I saw them, shapes moving just beyond reach, tall and human-shaped, their faces shifting between recognition and emptiness. And at the center, something vast. Something that wasn't a thing but a presence, old and patient, carved from the same silence that had haunted me since that first night. I understood then it was never chasing me, it was showing me. The cave wasn't a place, it was a reflection, a hollow where everything I'd refused to face had gathered and taken form, every fear, every failure, every moment I ignored the voice that said something was wrong. The knocking was just the sound of it waiting to be let in. I don't remember leaving the cave. Only the feeling of weightlessness, like I was drifting through fog. When I came to, I was back in the desert, lying on the porch as dawn broke. The stones were gone, the wind was still, but inside the cabin on the wall above my bed, someone or something had carved a new mark. 3 lines, crossed once, and beneath it a single word, open quote, stay, close quote. I've been thinking about what that means. Maybe the reason every ranger quits after one night isn't because the forest drives them away. It's because it doesn't want them to leave. It takes them, keeps them, fills them with the same silence that fills the trees, the caves, the ground itself. And maybe that's what's happening to me now. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the window and I don't recognize it right away. My face looks softer, my eyes darker, like they've seen too much. My voice sounds slower when I speak, like I'm learning to match another rhythm. 3. Pause. 3. I think about that first night often, the silence, the knocks, the reflection in the glass. Maybe the thing that stood outside wasn't trying to get in. Maybe it was waiting for me to step out, to take its place. Maybe I already have. If someone finds this recording, if anyone still goes looking for the truth behind Camp Arrowhead, don't. It doesn't want to be found. It only needs to be remembered. And once you remember it, it remembers you. So when you're alone, somewhere quiet, if you ever hear that rhythm, that soft knocking that seems to come from nowhere, don't answer. Don't move, because it isn't knocking to come inside. It's knocking to see if you're still out there. 3. Pause. 3. And when you hear it answer back in your own voice, that's how it begins. I've worked in the woods long enough to know when the forest doesn't want you there. It's not something you can see. It's not even something you can describe. It's a change in the air. The quiet goes flat, and the trees seem to lean in as if they're listening, waiting for you to take one more step so they can close behind you. My name doesn't matter much anymore. What matters is that I was a ranger once, stationed in one of those sprawling tracts of government-protected wilderness that the public knows by postcard photos and trail maps. To most people, it's just another slice of the Pacific Northwest. Moss-draped pines, fog so thick it turns sunlight into smoke, rivers that cut through black rock. But for me, it was home. I started out like anyone else, proud, naive, thinking the job was about preserving beauty. You learn quick it's more about managing danger. Poachers, lost hikers, fires, sudden floods, and sometimes things that don't have a name, things that the older rangers don't write in the reports. There was one section of the forest, a deep, uneven basin north of Boundary Creek, that no one patrolled. The official reasoning was simple enough: unstable terrain, risk of sinkholes. But that explanation never fit. We had gear for that. We handled landslides, flash floods, bear encounters, everything that should have made that place manageable. And yet every map in the ranger station had that patch shaded over, with a handwritten note beside it in the margin. Restricted zone, do not enter. Every ranger who'd been there long enough had a story. One guy claimed he saw firelight in the fog at 2 in the morning when he was miles from the nearest campsite. Another swore he heard a woman laughing under the snowmelt bridge, where the water should have drowned out everything. And a few, the ones who'd worked back in the 70s, wouldn't even talk about it. They just said, "That section's claimed. Don't go stirring it up." At first, I didn't think much of it. I was young. I thought it was ranger folklore, like the bear of legend that could open coolers, or the ghost hikers who walk the trails after dusk. Every job with danger makes its own myths, but myths have a way of surviving for a reason. My partner at the time, Ben, was older. He'd been on the job 20 years and had that quiet, patient calm of someone who'd already seen what most people never would. We worked well together. He'd tell me stories while we repaired trail signs or checked illegal campsites about how the forest remembers every sound, how every broken branch means something. I laughed it off. Until the day he stopped mid-sentence on patrol, staring into the tree line, his hand on his radio but not speaking. "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head slowly, his eyes distant. "We're near the line," he said. "You feel that?" I didn't, not at first, but then I noticed the wind had stopped. No birds, no crickets, even the smell had changed. Usually the woods smell like sap, soil, and pine, clean and ancient. But there, it was different. It was cold metal and damp rot, like a basement that hadn't been opened in years. We turned back. Ben didn't say another word for the rest of the hike. Later that night, over coffee at the station, I asked him what that was about. He didn't look up from his mug. "You remember those sinkholes they tell us about?" "Yeah. They're not sinkholes. They're entrances." That word stuck with me. Entrances to what? He never elaborated, and I didn't push. You learn not to in this line of work. When a man's voice carries that kind of weight, you don't pry. But curiosity festers, especially when you spend your nights in a ranger cabin surrounded by 100,000 acres of unanswered questions. A few months later, a hiker went missing near Boundary Creek. Routine search. I volunteered. It was late fall, the kind of cold that gets inside your gloves. We split into 2 teams. Ben took the West Ridge. I took the East. We planned to meet at the creek's fork by sundown. The search started normal. We called, we checked game trails, we followed footprints that eventually disappeared into soft moss. Around 3 in the afternoon, the fog rolled in, thick, white, and heavy. That's when I heard it. A radio click. Not a transmission. Just a single click followed by another. The kind of thing you do to test if someone's on the channel. I answered, "Ben, you there?" No reply. Just another click. Static hissed through the speaker, then went dead. I tried again. "Ben, respond." That's when I realized the sound wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from ahead, from somewhere in the trees. The clicks turned rhythmic, slow at first, then faster. Click, 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 like someone tapping metal against metal in a code I didn't understand. I wanted to think it was a woodpecker or something mechanical, but it echoed wrong, too deep, too deliberate. I took a few steps forward and the sound stopped. Silence fell so complete it hurt my ears. I turned around and saw a shape standing in the fog, maybe 30 feet behind me. At first, I thought it was Ben. The build looked right, broad shoulders, ranger jacket. But something was off. The head was tilted too far to one side, and the outline of the body wasn't steady. It shimmered like heat above asphalt. "Ben?" I called. The figure moved, slow, deliberate. It took a step toward me, and the ground seemed to swallow the sound of its footfall. Another step, and I realized I couldn't see its face, just darkness, where the face should have been. I raised my flashlight, but before I could aim, it lifted its arm and pressed a finger to where its lips should have been. A gesture for silence. I don't remember backing away. I just know I ran. Through the fog, through the trees, until my lungs burned and the world tilted around me. When I finally stopped, I checked my radio again. This time, Ben's voice came through, shouting my name. He said he'd been looking for me for over 2 hours, but my watch said it'd only been 20 minutes. When we met at the rendezvous point, his face was pale. "You went past the line," he said. "Didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The mud on my boots told him everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that sound, the rhythmic click, echoing from somewhere just outside the cabin. Every time I looked at the radio, it was off, but the antenna moved, like something had brushed against it. By morning, Ben was gone. They said he probably left to look for the missing hiker again, and when a storm hit that night, the search was called off. They found his gear 2 days later near the basin. No tracks, no signs of struggle, just his backpack and his radio, still on, battery dead. I tried to move on, but I couldn't. There was something wrong with how it ended. Ben was too careful, too experienced. Whatever happened to him, it wasn't an accident. And I couldn't stop thinking about that line, that shaded zone no ranger was supposed to cross, because I'd crossed it once, and it was waiting for me to come back. The week after Ben vanished, the woods stopped feeling like a place I worked and started feeling like a place that was watching me. I'd done missing person cases before. Hikers, hunters, even a few kids who wandered too far from camp. But this was different. There was no closure, no last radio call, no body to recover, just fog and silence and a hollow space where a man used to be. The official report said, presumed drowned. That word, presumed, haunted me. It meant we gave up. I stayed on the job, but things shifted. Rangers aren't supposed to get attached to one another like family, but that's exactly what happens when you're out there for months, miles from anyone else. You start to understand each other's silences, each other's fears, and Ben's absence changed the air around the station. No one talked about him, but I'd catch the others pausing at his empty locker, glancing toward the radio rack when static flared for no reason. After his disappearance, the boundary markers near Boundary Creek were doubled. Fresh paint, new signs, unstable terrain, do not enter. But we all knew it wasn't about terrain. It was about whatever was underneath it. About 2 weeks later, the night watch was assigned to me. I didn't ask for it, but I didn't refuse either. Maybe I was hoping for something, a clue, a sound, a reason, something to make sense of what happened. The cabin sat deep in the pines with a wraparound deck and a single spotlight over the door. At night, that beam of light made a perfect cone through the mist. Everything beyond it was shadow and movement. I kept the radio on the desk, a thermos of coffee beside it, and my logbook open to the blank page that should have been Ben's last entry. Around 1:30 a.m., the forest began to change again. It's hard to describe unless you've lived it, how the stillness can take on weight, how silence can feel louder than wind. I heard a faint tapping at first, then a click. Click, click, click. It was faint, coming from the tree line behind the cabin. I told myself it was woodpeckers, even though woodpeckers don't knock at night. I stood up, opened the door, and listened. The sound stopped. Then, from somewhere deeper in the dark, came 3 quick knocks, not on wood, on metal. I turned toward the sound and froze. The spotlight flickered once, twice, then cut out completely. The forest swallowed me in black. Every instinct screamed to go back inside, to grab the flashlight, but I couldn't move. The smell hit first. That same cold metallic rot, like wet earth and rusted tools. Then a voice came from the dark, faint, almost swallowed by distance. Help. It sounded like Ben. I took 1 step forward, then another. My flashlight barely cut through the mist. The beam shimmered on the fog like a blade of white, useless against the density of the night. Ben, I called. Where are you? Down here. The voice came again, but not from ahead, from below. I swept the light downward and saw a patch of ground that didn't look right, soil too soft, too dark, as if the forest floor had caved in and something had tried to hide it. The edges were smooth, circular, not natural. I knelt, trying to get a closer look, when I noticed the frost on the leaves wasn't forming outward. It was drawing inward, condensing toward the hole like breath being pulled into a mouth. The air was warm one moment and freezing the next. I could feel the cold crawling up my arms as if the earth itself was breathing against my skin. Then something inside the hole moved. Just a shift, the faintest ripple of shadow below the surface. and I stumbled back so hard I hit the porch railing. The ground shuddered once, then went still. When I got my footing, the voice was gone. The smell lingered, damp, metallic, and I could feel that same oppressive quiet pressing against my ears again. I went inside, locked the door, and radioed the main station. Possible ground collapse near cabin 4. No visible sinkhole, but I think it's expanding. Request inspection crew. Static. Then a single click. Another. And then faintly from the receiver, "Don't enter." The signal cut off. By morning, I tried to report it officially, but the response was the same old dismissal. Old wiring, atmospheric interference, probably radio echo. Except I know what I heard, and I knew that voice. I tried to focus on routine patrols for the next few days, but every path seemed to lead me back to the edge of that restricted zone. It was like the forest itself was pulling me there. Animals avoided it. The deer trails stopped abruptly before it. Even the trees looked different, twisted slightly, their trunks curving inward as if leaning toward something hidden at the center. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. On my day off, I decided to go back. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, stay near the perimeter, document the terrain, get photographic evidence of the so-called sinkholes. But deep down, I knew what I was really looking for. Answers. Maybe even Ben. It was late afternoon when I reached the boundary line. The light was gold and low, filtering through the furze in long columns. I followed the old survey tape tied around a tree, torn and weathered by time. Beyond that was unmarked territory. The air was different there, stiller, heavier. Each breath felt like I was inhaling dust that wasn't meant to move. About 100 yards in, I found the first sign that no ranger should ever ignore: boot prints. Deep ones. Not from hikers. The tread was standard issue, same as mine. There were 2 sets, both old, both leading deeper into the shaded section. I followed. After another quarter mile, I found the second thing, a broken radio, half buried in the mud. The casing was cracked, antenna bent, serial number scratched off. I wiped the mud from the side and froze. Carved faintly into the plastic, as if done by a knife, was a single word: stay. My first thought was that Ben left it, but then I realized something else. The battery was still inside. When I touched it, a faint warmth pulsed through the casing, like a dying heartbeat. Radios don't stay warm after 2 weeks in the cold. The forest began to feel smaller then, not physically, but emotionally, like it was closing in. Every sound echoed wrong. When the wind brushed through the needles, it whispered in a rhythm that almost made words, and then I heard the clicking again. This time, it wasn't faint. It was all around me. Click, 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 pause, click, click, click. I turned in every direction, trying to locate it. It wasn't one sound. It was dozens, layered and overlapping, each one slightly out of sync, like the forest was repeating an old message over and over, broken on playback. My flashlight beam landed on a tree trunk ahead, and I froze. Carved into the bark were lines, shapes, markings, circles inside circles, triangles nested within them, a spiral that didn't end. It wasn't vandalism. It was a pattern, deliberate, repeated, mathematical, and in the center of it, the wood was blackened, charred as if burned from the inside out. I reached out to touch it, and the instant my fingers brushed the groove, I heard breathing. Not mine, not human. It was low, steady, exhaling from somewhere beneath the soil. And then from behind me, in the same voice I'd heard that night, "Down here." I didn't turn around at first. Every instinct in my body said not to. The forest had gone completely still again. No wind, no rustling branches, not even the distant sound of running water. Just that voice, low and strained, breathing through the soil. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I forced myself to look back, inch by inch. The fog had thickened behind me, turning the trees into silhouettes. But there, maybe 20 feet away, was a shape. It was crouched beside a log, half hidden by shadow. I could only see part of it, a shoulder, the back of a jacket, the faint glint of metal near the wrist. My chest tightened. It looked exactly like a ranger's uniform. "Ben?" The figure didn't move. I took a step forward. My boot sank slightly in the damp moss, making a sound that seemed deafening in the stillness. "Ben, is that you?" Slowly, the figure straightened. Its movements were awkward, stiff, delayed, as if it were learning how to stand again. When it turned its head toward me, I saw the brim of a ranger's hat, the same model we all wore. But the face underneath wasn't Ben's. The skin was pale and uneven, like bark half peeled from a tree. The eyes were too dark, too deep set, reflecting the flashlight in a way that didn't catch the iris. The thing smiled, or tried to. The lips cracked at the corners, revealing teeth that looked like stone fragments. My breath caught. It raised its hand and held out something, an old radio, mud-caked and dented. The same one I'd found earlier. Only now it was clean. "Ben?" I whispered again, but the voice that came out wasn't mine. It was smaller, like a child lost in the dark. The figure took one step forward. The ground beneath it made a wet sound, and for a split second I saw what it was standing on, an old ranger badge, half buried in the soil. The name had been scratched out. I stumbled back. My shoulder hit a tree, and the radio in my hand hissed with static. Then came the clicks again. Fast this time. Click, 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 like Morse code, urgent, repeating. My flashlight flickered, then went dead. The darkness that followed wasn't normal darkness. It had weight, like water. I could feel it pressing against my skin, filling my lungs. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't respond. Then something grabbed my wrist, cold fingers, wet, hard, strong. They squeezed, pulling me forward. I yanked back instinctively, but the grip didn't loosen. I could feel my pulse beating against its grip. "Let go," I shouted, my voice breaking. The forest answered. The trees groaned, bending with a sound like old rope twisting under somewhere behind me. Wood cracked, then another, echoing like gunfire. The air filler filled with the smell of sap and iron, sharp and raw. The hand let go. I fell backward, hit the ground hard, and scrambled away, scraping my palms on the roots. My flashlight came back on for a split second, just long enough for me to see the figure tilt its head and whisper something I'll never forget. Too late. And then it was gone. I don't remember how I got back to the cabin. My clothes were soaked, my hands bleeding, my boots caked in that same black mud I'd seen near the hole. I locked the door, collapsed against it, and listened. The forest outside was still again, but the quiet didn't comfort me anymore. It felt staged, like the woods were waiting for me to fall asleep. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the window. Every so often, I swore I saw movement in the fog, shapes pacing just beyond the clearing, never quite stepping into view. When the sun rose, I packed up and drove to the station. I was done pretending this was normal. The chief ranger, a man named Hartley, was waiting in his office. He'd been there longer than anyone, old enough that his badge looked like it came from another era. I told him everything, the voice, the hole, the figure. I showed him the radio I'd found, the patterns on the trees. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, sighed, and said something that chilled me worse than anything I'd seen out there. "You weren't supposed to see it." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer right away. He just turned his monitor around to face me. On the screen was a live map feed of the park, GPS tags for patrol units, trail cams, and weather markers. But there, in the center of the screen, was a wide gray void. No data, no signal, no coordinates. "That's the restricted section," he said. "The system doesn't read it, never has." I leaned closer. "Why?" Hartley closed the window and stood up. "You ever wonder why the soil stays soft there year-round? Why the air temperature drops 10 degrees without elevation change?" He walked to a filing cabinet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thin folder so worn the edges were curling. Inside were grainy black and white photos, old ranger teams, excavation gear, men standing in front of large holes in the earth. "This was 1963, he said quietly. They tried to build a fire lookout tower near Boundary Creek. Foundation kept collapsing. Every time they poured concrete, the ground caved in, so they started digging." He flipped to another photo. It showed a massive pit, maybe 20 feet wide, lined with wooden supports. At the bottom, half buried in shadow, something protruded from the dirt, something round, metallic, covered in markings that looked like writing but weren't any language I recognized. They found that. I looked closer. What is it? They never figured it out, Hartley said. Some said it was a piece of meteorite, the collector. Others said it was old, older than the soil around it. They sent samples to the university. The samples came back wrong. Different mineral composition, non-local material. He met my eyes. And then the men who found it started hearing things. He didn't need to explain further. I already knew what he meant. The clicking, the whispers. They sealed it up, he said. Filled it in, declared the area unstable, and shut it down. That was supposed to be the end of it, but every few years, something opens back up. A hiker disappears. A ranger goes missing. The earth won't hold it. I stared at the photo again. The object's surface looked smooth, but there was something faintly reflective about it, like it wasn't metal but water pretending to be solid. So what do we do now? I asked. Hartley closed the folder. You forget it. You keep the boundaries where they are. You don't go back there, no matter what you hear. He hesitated before adding, and if you ever hear your name whispered out there, you run. That should have been enough. Any sane man would have let it go. But curiosity is a disease. Once it roots itself, it spreads. And that night, when the wind returned to the forest, I heard something faintly carried on it. Just one word, stretched thin through the pines. Help. Ben's voice. The same tone, the same rhythm, coming from the direction of the restricted zone. I stood at the cabin door, staring into the fog, knowing what I was about to do. I turned off the radio, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. And the forest welcomed me back. The fog moved differently that night. It wasn't drifting with the wind. It was following something. Me. Every step I took along the gravel road seemed to draw the mist closer, until it wrapped around my boots like smoke curling from the ground. I told myself this was for Ben. I told myself I just needed closure, a sign, something that would explain what happened. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was being pulled. The forest wanted me back. The radio was silent at first. I kept it off to avoid interference, but the static always found its way in. By the time I reached the fork leading toward the restricted section, the device crackled alive on its own. Help. The voice was faint, stretched thin like it was coming from miles underground. The click. Stay. Down. The last word was so quiet I almost missed it. I wasn't sure if it was a warning or an invitation. I passed the final warning sign, the same one that read, "Unstable terrain, do not enter," and stepped into the forbidden woods. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath came out in white plumes. The air had that metallic taste again, sharp and electric. The deeper I went, the more wrong everything felt. The forest floor was uneven, not from roots or rocks, but from subtle dips, circular impressions like something had once pulsed beneath the soil. The trees leaned inward here too, but not from wind. Their trunks bowed toward a common point ahead, like hundreds of bodies frozen mid-prayer. I shone my flashlight between them and saw what looked like claw marks running along the bark. Long, parallel gashes that started low and ended high, as if something tall had dragged itself upright using the trees for balance. A sound broke the silence. Not the clicking this time, something softer, breathing. I stopped and listened. It was coming from everywhere, echoing faintly in the fog. Inhale, exhale, deep, steady, unnatural. I whispered Ben's name. The breathing stopped, and then the forest exhaled. A gust of freezing wind swept through, strong enough to knock branches loose. My flashlight flickered. When it came back on, the ground beneath the nearest pine had sunk slightly, as though the earth had just inhaled. My heart hammered. I told myself to turn around, but instead I found my boots carrying me forward, down a shallow incline toward the creek bed. The water had nearly dried up for the season, leaving a trench of black mud and exposed stone, and there, half buried at the center, was the hole. It was larger now. I could see where the earth had collapsed inward, smooth, circular, almost deliberate. The surface shimmered faintly, like heat rising off pavement. But it was cold, so cold that frost had formed around the rim, crusting the mud in a ring. The smell hit me again, iron and rot mixed with something sour, chemical. I knelt, holding the flashlight out. The beam disappeared after only a few feet, swallowed by darkness. That's when I heard it. The voice. Help me. My grip tightened on the flashlight. It was Ben's voice, no question, same tone, same cadence. Ben, where are you? Down here. It was coming from inside the hole. I leaned closer, my own reflection faintly visible in the mud-streaked surface. The sound echoed up again, louder this time, layered. Not one voice, but several, overlapping, all whispering the same words in different tones. Down. Down here. My hand moved without thought. I reached toward the edge, trying to shine the light deeper. The ground beneath my palm pulsed, a slow, rhythmic motion like breathing, and then the surface shifted. The mud rippled outward, forming tiny concentric waves. My reflection distorted, the flashlight beam warped. Something below moved, something massive. I stumbled back, my boots sinking ankle-deep in the sludge. For a second, I thought I was imagining it until a shape began to rise. It wasn't a creature. Not exactly. It was the same metallic surface from the photo Hartley showed me, smooth, rounded, almost beautiful. But it wasn't buried anymore. It was alive. The thing wasn't metal at all. It was skin, glistening under the light with a sheen like oil and ice combined. Lines along its surface shifted and rearranged, glowing faintly with pale internal light. And the clicking returned, loud, overlapping, no longer random. It was speech. It was talking. I stepped back, trembling. My flashlight caught the side of the object as it began to open. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was organic, like bone cracking underwater. The air around me vibrated. Every tree within sight shivered, their branches twisting as if reaching toward it. My radio, even though turned off, began to crackle violently. Stay down. Hartley's voice. Not live. A recording. The next sound was Ben, weak, strained, echoing from within the object itself. It's not a cave, he said. It's a mouth. Something wet and heavy hit the mud beside the hole. I turned the light down and froze. It was a boot. A ranger's boot. The same model as mine. Another dropped beside it, still laced, still filled. The mud around them quivered, tiny bubbles rising to the surface. I took a step back, then another. The radio shrieked, the static cutting through like a scream. And then, from within the opening, a shape began to rise. At first, I thought it was a person crawling out. But the longer I watched, the less sense it made. The figure had arms, but they were too long. It moved wrong, its motions smooth and jerky at once like time skipping between frames. It lifted its head, the face was blank, no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, gray skin. But as my light hit it, faint impressions began to appear beneath the surface. A nose, lips, cheekbones, features forming as if the thing were learning to copy them. And then I realized whose face it was trying to make. Mine. Every muscle in my body seized. I ran. The ground convulsed beneath me, the mud pulling at my boots like hands. The trees creaked, bending inward as if to block my path. I sprinted uphill, the sound of the clicking now a constant roar, each pulse synchronized with my heartbeat. When I reached the tree line, the forest behind me erupted in motion. Branches snapped, birds scattered, and something large moved through the fog. Not walking, but sliding, pulling itself forward with impossible grace. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The air behind me pulsed with sound, not human, not animal. A deep, resonant frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. By the time I reached the cabin, I was half delirious. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and collapsed against it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The radio on the desk clicked once, then twice. And then, in my own voice, it said, "Don't run." The flashlight flickered out, and the window beside the door filled with movement. Something was standing just outside, tall, still, human-shaped, its hand pressed against the glass. Slowly, deliberately, it began to trace a circle on the pane, the same spiral symbol carved into the trees. I backed away until I hit the far wall. It stopped drawing, and then, in the faint reflection of the glass, I saw my own face staring back at me from the outside. I don't know how long I stood there staring at that reflection. My brain refused to make sense of it. I kept blinking, thinking it had to be a trick of the glass, a shadow, anything that would make the impossible seem less real. But the reflection didn't move when I did. It smiled when I didn't. Then it raised its hand again, palm against the glass, and I realized the fingertips weren't leaving smudges. They were leaving prints, ridged and wet, like clay pressed from the inside of a mold. My knees almost gave out. I fumbled for the flashlight, dropped it, and it rolled under the table. The moment I bent to grab it, the window cracked. A thin, spidering line cut straight down the middle of the glass, followed by another and another, each one spreading like veins. I bolted for the door, but before I could touch the handle, the radio blared to life. "Stay inside." Hartley's voice again, only this time it wasn't a recording. "Who is this?" I shouted. "Hartley, are you there?" "Listen to me," he said. His tone was low, urgent. "If it's at your window, do not look at it. Do not answer. It's learning your responses. Every sound, every motion, it's mapping you." "What the hell are you talking about? Lock the lights. Cover the glass. If you see yourself outside, that isn't you." Then the radio clicked off. I backed away, heart hammering in my chest, and yanked the curtain shut. The fabric was thin, barely enough to block out the shape behind it. I could still see movement, slow, deliberate pacing, like it was studying the cabin. I thought about running, but something deeper, older, told me not to. I'd seen what happened when you went out there uninvited. I wasn't going to give it another shape to copy. I grabbed a blanket, duct tape, and whatever I could find, covering the windows one by one. The forest outside was alive with noise, branches cracking, low moans like wind moving through hollow logs, the distant sound of clicking that rose and fell in rhythm with my heartbeat. When I got to the last window, I hesitated. My reflection was faint in the glass, distorted by the darkness and the fog. But just before I covered it, I saw the shape outside again. Closer this time. It wasn't alone anymore. 2 more figures had joined it. All of them standing in a loose circle, motionless, facing the cabin. Their outlines were wrong. Too tall, too narrow at the shoulders, their heads tilting just a little too far to one side, as if their necks hadn't figured out how to balance. They didn't move when I covered the glass. For hours, nothing happened. The clicking faded. The forest fell silent again. I sat at the table, clutching the flashlight, trying not to breathe too loudly. I must have drifted in and out of consciousness because the next thing I knew, dawn was leaking pale light around the edges of the curtains. I peeled one corner back carefully. The clearing was empty. No footprints, no figures, just fog lifting off the dew. I told myself it was over, that I'd imagined it, that stress and sleeplessness had made me hallucinate. I even laughed, just once, a short, sharp sound that didn't feel like it came from me. Then the smell hit. Rot. Iron. Wet soil. I turned toward the door. Something had been dragged across the floor overnight. Long, parallel streaks in the dust leading from the doorway to the back of the cabin. The wood beneath them was damp, dark. I followed the trail with trembling hands. It ended at the wall, near the old heating vent. The grate was open. I crouched down and shone my light inside. The vent was supposed to be shallow, just enough for air circulation, but what I saw went much deeper. A black vertical shaft, carved straight into the foundation, descending into the earth. Something glinted in the beam of my flashlight. I reached in with a stick and pulled it toward me. A badge. Ranger issue. The nameplate had been scraped off, but the back was engraved with 2 words, "Stay down." That's when I heard it again. Faint, rising through the vent as though carried up from miles below. Down here. I dropped the badge. My hand brushed the edge of the vent, and the metal was warm. Not like heat, like something alive. I ran outside, straight into the morning fog. My truck was parked by the ridge. I started it, floored the gas, and didn't stop until I hit the paved road 20 miles away. When I reached the main ranger station, Hartley was waiting on the porch. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You shouldn't have gone back there," he said quietly. I slammed the door behind me. You knew what was out there." He didn't argue. He just rubbed his temples and said, "There's a reason the boundaries exist." Ben's voice. "It's not him," he cut in. "Whatever's under that ground uses voices. The soil absorbs sound. Every word that's ever been spoken near it gets stored. It plays them back. That's how it lures people in. My stomach turned. What is it? No one knows, he said. We think it's older than the forest, older than the bedrock. When they dug for the tower in the 60s, they woke it up. Whatever it is, it wants forms, faces. It learns by reflection. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. And once it learns your reflection, you start seeing it everywhere. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I could still go home, still get out before it got worse. But the truth was already sinking in. My reflection in the glass door of the station wasn't quite right. It blinked a fraction of a second late. Hartley must have noticed my expression because he said, "Don't look in mirrors for a while, and don't answer if you hear yourself talking." He handed me a small object, a key. "What's this? Old storm bunker," he said. "Built before the tower project. If things get bad, go there. No mirrors, no glass. It's the only place they don't follow." He turned away, his voice barely audible as he added, "They only come for those who look too long." I left that afternoon. I drove for hours through back roads and logging trails until I reached the old service road that led to the bunker. The air grew colder the closer I got, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. When I finally parked, I sat for a long time, engine idling, staring at the tree line. The fog had gathered again, thick and heavy. It curled across the hood, climbed the windshield, and for a moment, I thought I saw the faint outline of a handprint forming in the condensation. I blinked, and it was gone. I got out, walked to the bunker entrance, and unlocked the door. The hinges groaned. The air inside was still, stale. I descended the steps one by one, the flashlight beam shaking across concrete walls until I reached the bottom. And there, painted across the far wall in faded red letters, were the words I'd been hearing all along. Down here. Something behind the wall breathed. And I finally understood what Ben meant when he said it wasn't a cave. It was waiting for us to come back. The bunker smelled like old stone and battery acid. The kind of smell that seeps into your clothes, into your lungs, until you can't tell whether it's around you or inside you. I stood there for a long time, the words on the wall burning into my eyes. Down here. The paint had flaked, but it was still vivid, like it hadn't aged the way the rest of the place had. Like it had been written again and again. My flashlight beam trembled as I scanned the rest of the room. Bare concrete, an old metal cot, a rusted cabinet. No mirrors, just as Hartley said. The silence was so complete I could hear my pulse in my ears. Then something dripped, just a single drop, somewhere behind the wall. The sound echoed, hollow, heavy, wet. Another followed, then another, a steady rhythm. It almost sounded like breathing. I backed toward the steps, but the door above had shut on its own. The sound it made when it closed wasn't right. It didn't slam. It clicked, click, click, click. I froze. The bunker light flickered, dim orange, powered by some emergency circuit I hadn't touched. The air pressure shifted. I could feel it against my skin, the heaviness, the vibration in the walls. Something beneath me was moving. Then I heard the voice. You came back. It wasn't Ben this time. It was mine. Exactly mine. I turned, the flashlight shaking violently in my grip. The sound was coming from the far wall behind the paint, muffled like a recording played through concrete. You shouldn't have come back. The wall rippled. I'm not exaggerating. It moved subtly like water under a sheet of glass. The paint cracked, flakes falling to the floor. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned out the next few words, but I caught fragments. Learned, you, face. The light died. Pitch black. Total silence. I dropped to my knees, fumbling for the flashlight. When it came back on, the words on the wall were gone. The paint, the lettering, everything. The wall was smooth again, damp with condensation. Something was behind me. I didn't hear it move. I felt it. The air temperature shifted, the tiny hairs on the back of my neck standing upright. When I turned, the beam of the flashlight caught the edge of a figure emerging from the shadow near the stairs. At first, it was a man, a ranger. The uniform looked like ours, same jacket, same insignia, but his movements were too slow, too deliberate. The light hit his face and I almost dropped the flashlight. It was me. Every detail, my face, my beard, even the scar on my left temple. But the eyes were wrong, pupilless, solid black, like polished stone. It smiled, and when it spoke, the voice was mine, layered over with a low, vibrating hum. You took something from us. The words weren't just heard, they vibrated in my chest. I don't know what you are, I managed to whisper. It tilted its head. We are what you buried. It took a step forward. The floor shuddered. Behind it, the wall began to breathe again, expanding and contracting like a massive lung. The concrete groaned. Cracks splintered outward, glowing faintly with pale light, the same light I'd seen in the hole at Boundary Creek. You learned the forest, it said, but not what listens beneath it. I stumbled backward, flashlight beam shaking across the bunker. The cracks widened, a low, humming frequency filling the room, too deep to be sound. It was pressure, vibration, something that lived below hearing. I don't belong here, I said. It smiled wider. You never did. The next moment, the wall split, not like an explosion, like an opening. The concrete peeled back in silent layers, revealing something vast and black beyond it. A depth that wasn't just a tunnel or cave. It felt infinite, as if I was staring into the reflection of night itself. The light flickered. Inside that darkness, movement, shapes forming and dissolving, and then faces. Hundreds of them, faint, translucent, drifting upward like air bubbles in water. They were human, but blurred, unfinished, and all of them looked like rangers. Ben was there. His face surfaced for an instant, eyes wide, mouth open, whispering something I couldn't hear. I dropped the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room. I ran. Up the stairs, slamming my shoulder against the bunker door until it burst open. The cold night air hit me like a wave, sharp and metallic. I stumbled out, gasping, collapsing into the wet grass. The forest around me was silent again. No movement, no wind, just that heavy stillness that meant it was still listening. I got to my feet, shaking, half expecting to see those things following me through the fog. But there was nothing, just the woods, endless and watching. The truck's headlights cut through the mist. I climbed in, started the engine, and peeled away from the clearing, tires spitting gravel. As I drove, the radio came alive again. Copy that, 10-4. Report at station, normal chatter. Normal life. Then a voice cut through the static. You left it open. I looked at the radio, pulse hammering. The voice was mine again. We can see you now. I ripped the radio from the dash and threw it out the window. It vanished into the fog. The road wound through the forest, switchback after switchback, the trees pressing closer, the headlights reflecting off their slick bark. For a moment, I thought I saw movement between them, a flicker of something pale keeping pace beside the truck. Too fast, too close. I floored it. When I finally broke through the tree line, the world opened. The sky, gray, endless. Civilization, power lines, a rest stop. I pulled over, staggered out, and leaned against the hood, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't sleep that night. I drove until morning, until the forest was nothing but a green smear in the distance. But it didn't feel like I'd left it. Every reflective surface I passed, mirrors, windows, chrome bumpers, I caught glimpses that didn't quite line up. My reflection lagged behind by half a heartbeat. My lips moved after I spoke. When I finally reached town, I walked into the ranger headquarters, handed Hartley my badge, and said I was done. He didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes tired. You can't leave it behind, he said quietly. No one ever does. I turned to go. Before I reached the door, he said, if it calls you again, don't answer. It doesn't want you dead. It wants you hollow. I didn't look back. That was months ago. I've been moving from place to place since, never near forests, never near anything with deep roots or fog. But sometimes late at night, when I close my eyes, I hear it. Click, click, click. And sometimes when I wake up, there's dirt under my fingernails. The doctors say it's stress, sleepwalking, trauma. But I know better because last week I got a letter in the mail, no return address, inside just one thing, a ranger badge. Mine. Scratched into the back were two words, stay down. And when I looked in the mirror this morning, I swear I saw the reflection smile before I did.